Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Sukkah Daf Mem Zayin contains two sugyas, both surrounding the halacha of Shmini Atzeres and whether or not it's considered part of Sukkot. The first question is Shmini Atzeres, the first day of Shmini Atzeres in Chutz La'aretz, where it's Safek last day of Sukkot, Safek first day of Shmini Atzeres. Do we sit in the sukkah, or do we even make a bracha on the sukkah on that day? The second sugya we'll discuss is Shechianu on Shmini Atzeres. Every Yom Tov gets a Shechianu. Is Shmini Atzeres a new Yom Tov that gets its own Shechianu, or is it considered the end of Sukkot and it does not get a new Shechianu, just like the last days of Pesach don't get a Shechianu? So the Gemara will discuss both of these sugyas. So we begin with the first one, and the Gemara says we have a discussion what happens when you live in Chutz La'aretz and it's Sfeika D'Yoma. We don't know if the first day of Shmini Atzeres is really the seventh day of Sukkot or it's the first day of Shmini Atzeres. Now, if it would be the seventh day of Sukkot, you would have to sit in the Sukkah. If it would be the first day of Shmini Atzeres, you would have to not sit in the Sukkah. You don't sit in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. Another question is, what bracha do you say in Tefillah, Shemayin Esrei, Berachas Hamazon? Do you say it's Yom Chag HaSukkos Hazeh? Do you say Yom HaShmini Atzeres Chag Hazeh? Or Yom HaShmini Chag Atzeres Hazeh, depending on your Nusach Tefillah. So Gemara quotes a machlokes between Rav and Rav Yochanan. Now, they both agree that you say Shmini Atzeres in the brachos. The brachos you call it Shmini Atzeres, that's for sure. The question is, what about Sukkah? So the Gemara first quotes the machlokes, then the Gemara tries to explain what exactly the machlokes is referring to, because it's unclear. The way we have the machlokes quoted is that according to Rav, Inyan Sukkah, as far as Sukkah is concerned, this day is considered to be Shvi, the seventh day of Sukkot, meaning it's still Sukkot. And according to Rav Yochanan, it's considered to be Shmini Atzeres. What does this mean? So the Gemara has two versions, with a proof of how to paskin in each version. According to the first version, everyone agrees that you sit in the sukkah. Rav and Rav Yochanan both agree you do sit in the sukkah on this day. The question is, do you say a bracha or not? According to Rav, it's considered sukkah, so you say a bracha. According to Rav Yochanan, it's not sure that it's sukkah, so we don't say a bracha. Says the Gemara, according to this version, you paskin like Rav Yochanan. Why? Because we have an incident that happened where all the Chachamim and Rav Huna Bar Bizna came to the sukkah on this day, first day of Shmini Atzeres, and they sat in the sukkah and they did not say a bracha. So you see everybody passing like Rav Yochanan and they didn't say a bracha. So the Gemara just asks, how do you know that they didn't say a bracha because it was Shmini Atzeres? Maybe they didn't say a bracha because they never say a bracha except for the first day of Sukkot. Maybe they held like the opinion, which we saw earlier in the parak. You only say a bracha the first day. You only say a leishev basukah the first day of Yom Tov, not the later days. So Gemara says that can't be the reason, because we have a tradition that the incident there had happened was that they had not sat in the sukkah the entire Yom Tov. They were busy shepherding their cattle. Now we know that the halacha is that somebody in that state is patur from sukkah, so they did not enter a sukkah the entire sukkah. It's a very interesting historical side note, and therefore they could not have been relying on a previous bracha. And if they didn't say a bracha now on Shmini Atzeres, it's because they held you do not say a bracha on Shmini Atzeres, and that's proof to Rav Yochanan. Now, the second version of the machlokes Rav and Rav Yochanan is that the machlokes is not whether or not you say a bracha. Everybody agrees you don't say a bracha. The question is, on this day, first day of Shmini Atzeres, which might be the seventh day of Sukkot, do you even sit in the sukkah or not? And there, Rav says it's considered sukkah and you do sit in the sukkah, and Rav Yochanan says you don't even sit in the sukkah. Says the Gemara, again, you should pass on like Rav Yochanan, because the one who quoted Rav here in the first place was Rav Shmuel Bar Shilas, and we have testimony that Rav Shmuel Bar Shilas himself did not sit in the sukkah. He ate outside the sukkah on this first day of Shmini Atzeres. Says the Gemara, halacha l'maisa, we paskin, we do sit in the sukkah, but we don't say a bracha. Okay, that's that discussion. Now the Gemara gets to its next discussion, which is, do you say a bracha of Shechianu on Shmini Atzeres? The question is it considered a new Yom Tov? You only say Shechianu on a new Yom Tov. If it's considered to be a new Yom Tov which happens to snug up against the end of Sukkot, you would say a Shechianu. If it's considered to be an extension, the last days of Sukkot, then you would not say a Shechianu. Now, Shvi Shel Pesach, we know, is considered part of Pesach. You don't say Shechianu on Shvi Shel Pesach. The question is, what about Shmini Atzeres? So the Gemara quotes Rav Yochanan, who says you do say a Shechianu. It is considered to be a new Yom Tov as opposed to a Shvi Shel Pesach. Says the Gemara, how do you know that it's considered to be a new Yom Tov? So the Gemara says it's different in 3 ways according to Chachamim and 2 ways according to Rabbi Yehuda. It's different in the sense, first of all, you don't sit in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. Second of all, there's no mitzvah of lo v'neser on Shmini Atzeres. And the third thing is Nisach HaMayim. According to the Chachamim, there's no Nisach HaMayim on Shmini Atzeres. They hold that there were 3 lugin that were poured on the Mizbeach every day of Sukkot, but not on Shmini Atzeres. And Rabbi Yehuda says no, there was only 1 lug, and it was poured every day, including Shmini Atzeres. So, according to Rabbi Yehuda, this is not a difference between Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres, but according to the Chachamim, it is. So the Gemara says, if this is the reason, because it's different mitzvahs, that you're saying that Shmini Atzeres is different than Sukkot, then you should also say that Shvi Shel Pesach is a different yontif than the rest of Pesach, because on Shvi Shel Pesach there's no mitzvah to eat matzah. There's no obligation to eat matzah. The first night of Pesach there is an obligation to eat matzah, and on Shvi Shel Pesach there is not. The Gemara says a few reasons that that's not a proof. Reason number 1, the mitzvah of eating matzah only applies Pesach night. You cannot say that the day of Shvi Shel Pesach is different than the first day of Pesach, because both are the same. Both do not have an obligation to eat matzah. It's only the nights. And therefore, you cannot call it a different yontif. The second is that it's only the first day of Pesach that you have a chiyuv to eat matzah. Nobody's arguing that Chal Moed is not part of Pesach. Nobody's saying it's a new yontif from Chal Moed, so you can't differentiate Shvi Shel Pesach from Chal Moed. If both Shvi Shel Pesach and Chal Moed, which clearly is Pesach, don't have a chiyuv to eat matzah. Shmini Atzeres is very different. It's different than all the other days. Here, Shvi Shel Pesach is very similar to most of the days. It's only different than the first day of Yontif. That doesn't make it a different Yontif. Now the Gemara brings a few more indications from the Psukim that Shmini Atzeres is really its own separate, different Yontif. The first is the Karbanos are different. If you look in the Psukim which describe the Karbanos, on Sukkot we drop down 1 cow per day. We start at 13 and go down to 7. Now, on Shmini Atzeres, though, we don't go down to 6. Shmini Atzeres is not part of the pattern. Shmini Atzeres, you only bring 1 part. So therefore, you show it's not part of the pattern, and therefore it is a different Yom Tov. Now, in its description of the Karbanos, this is our second thing. The Torah says, Uvayoim. Each time it says Uvayoim Sheni, you bring this much. Uvayoim Ashlishi, you bring this much. And on this day, and on this day, and on this day. However, by Shmini Atzeres, it doesn't say Uvayoim. It just says Bayoim. It doesn't say and. That means this is a new thing. It's a new Yontif. It's not considered another day of the same Yontif. And the third proof the Gemara says is from the word Kamishpat, describing the procedure of the Karbanos. It says Kamishpatam by all the ones of Sukkot, which shows that they're all the same as the other ones. They all do Kamishpatam, which means like their process. But for Shmini Atzeres, it just says Kamishpat, like its process, which again shows that it's different. Okay, now the Gemara wants to bring a proof to this halacha that you do say a bracha of Shechiyanu on Shmini Atzeres. It's from a lengthy brisa, which goes to machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chacham. The machlokes is, what if somebody doesn't have all the animals that are required? What if the entire tzibur doesn't have all the animals that are required for the karbanos of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres? For one of the days, let's say, doesn't have all the animals, he's missing one. Can he bring the other animals? Are they ma'akev? Is it possible to bring part of the animals and not all of them? So Gemara says that the Chachamim say, yeah, you cannot bring it. You have to have all or none. Rabbi Yehuda says no. You can bring whichever ones you have. As far as the cows, there's 3 types of animals brought. There are cows, goats, and sheep. As far as the cows, you can bring however many you have. You don't have to bring all of them. The goats and the sheep, you do have to bring all of them. So Gemara says, what's Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning? The Brisa says, what's Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning? He says, because the cows drop in a number day by day. You start at 13 and go down to 7. Obviously, the number is not that important. You can get away with the number. So Gemara asks, if that's true, the Brisa asks, if that's true, that you can go, that you prove that you don't need to have all the cows in order to bring any cows. So the fact that the number goes down, then you should say the same thing about the sheep and the goats, because the number there also goes down. Now, the number stays steady and constant throughout Sukkot, it's 14 and 2, 14 sheep and 2 goats, but it goes down on Shmini Atzeres. It goes down to 7 and 1. So you see, it does go down. So since it also goes down as far as Shmini Atzeres, so you should also be able to say the same thing. Since the number goes down, you don't have to have every one. So the Gemara says that Rav Yehuda answered that, and he says, no, Shmini Atzeres is not a proof. Shmini Atzeres is different than the rest of the Sukkot Yantif, and it's not considered to be going down. You can't say the number goes down over the course of the Yantif. It doesn't. It's a constant number of 14 and 2 for sheep and goats the entire Sukkot. Shmini Atzeres has a whole different setup. That doesn't mean that the number goes down at all. And now he says, I'm going to prove to you that it's a different number. And he says, because it's different in its carbon, shear, bracha, and lina. Now what are these things? So carbon, shear, and lina, the Gemara doesn't explain. Carbon means its karbanos are different. Shear means that the shira that the Leviim sing is different. The times of the Beis Hamikdash, they sang a shira specific to the Yom Tov. All the ones that are Sukkot related had to do with chesed and kindness and giving to the aniyim, because it was a time of gathering the crops and wanted to make sure to keep the aniyim in mind. But Shemini Atzeres has a different theme. Rashi says he doesn't know what it is. And Lina is the halacha that when you come to be Ola Regel, you have to stay the night after Matzoi Yontif. You can't leave Yontif by night, you have to stay till the next morning. So that's something you only have to do once per Aliyah L'Regel. So Sukkot, you have to stay the Matzah Yontif of the first day. Pesach, you have to stay Matzah Yontif. Anytime you come to the Beis Hamikdash, you have to stay one night afterwards. You bring the carbon Pesach, even Pesach Sheni, you have to stay one night afterwards. Well, the Gemara will discuss that, we'll see. But as far as Shmini Atzeres, it requires its own Lina. You cannot say, well, I stayed Matzah the first day, you have to stay again Matzah the second day, because therefore we see it's considered to be an independent Yontif. Now, the one thing the Brisa does not explain is bracha. What does it mean by bracha? That is independent in its bracha. So the Gemara says, Pashas, it means that it gets its own shechianu. So you see that Shmini Atzeres has its own shechianu. So the Gemara says, no, that's not what it means. It means that in Berachos HaMazon and in Tefillah, you call it differently. You don't call it Yom Chag HaSukkos Hazeh, you call it Yom Shmini Chag Atzeres Hazeh. Now, the Gemara says it's logical that that's the case, because if you think it's talking about the bracha, do you say a bracha throughout the days of Sukkot? You don't say a bracha throughout the days of Sukkot. You don't say shechianu throughout all the days of Sukkot. You only say shechianu on the first day. So if you meant to say that it's different than the rest of Sukkot, in the sense that you say your own shechianu, you didn't say a shechianu the rest of the days of Sukkot. On that, the Gemara answers, you're right. You don't say new shechianu any of the days of Sukkot. That's quite the point. But you could say shechianu on any of the days of Sukkot if you missed the first day. If you haven't said it yet, you can still say the shechianu for Sukkot any of the days of Sukkot. The Gemara says, that's true, you could say the shechianu any of the days, but you need to say shechianu over a cup of wine. Chalmaid, who has a cup of wine, to say shechianu. The Gemara says, you're right. If you happen to have a cup of wine, you could say it. All we mean to say is that it's possible, it's applicable. The Gemara now focuses on the halacha of lina, which we had seen in the Brisa. And Rabbi Yehuda says that Shmini Atzeres has a mitzvah of lina. You have to spend the night. You came to the Beis Hamikdash for Shmini Atzeres. To be Ola Regel, you have to spend the night. You cannot leave Matzah Shmini Atzeres. You have to leave only the following morning. The Gemara wants to know, is this really true that Rabbi Yehuda holds this way? Now, the source of the halacha of lina is where the Torah says, Ufanisa baboker v'alachta lahalacha. You can go home in the morning. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says that only applies to Pesach Rishon, not Pesach Sheni. It only applies to real Pesach, not somebody who was Tameh or too far, and he brought the Korban Pesach Sheni. He doesn't have to wait until the morning. What's his source? Because right after Fanisa Baboker, it says, Sheishes Yavim Tochal Matzahs. You should eat matzahs for 6 days. The two are connected, says Rabbi Yehuda. You only have to stay until the morning if following the day that you came, following the main carbon day, there's a mitzvah of eating matzahs for 6 days that follow. If you don't have 6 days that follow, you could leave right away matzah carbon day at night. Now this carbon here also refers to the Chagiga. If anybody brought the Chagiga a different day of Pesach, he also has to spend the night. Now, so the Gemara says, so you see that you only have to spend the night if you have 6 days that follow. So then Shmini Atzeres, you don't have 6 days that follow. You also should not have to spend the night. Why does Rabbi Yehuda say in this brisa that there is a separate mitzvah of lina on Shmini Atzeres night? Matzah Shmini Atzeres. So the Gemara says, now Rabbi Yehuda is only excluding Pesach Sheni. He's not excluding anything else that's 1 day long, and therefore Shmini Atzeres does have a halacha of lina. And I'll prove it to you because I have a Mishnah that shows that Rabbi Yehuda holds that Bikurim also requires lina. Bikurim is when you brought your first fruits to the Beis HaMikdash. You came to the Beis HaMikdash, you put in a basket, you waved it around, at least according to Rabbi Yehuda, you presented it to the Kohen, and you have to spend the night. So that's all a 1 day event. Also, there's no 6 days that follow that, and therefore, if we could really successfully show that Rabbi Yehuda is an author of a Mishnah that says that you have to spend the night, and there's mitzvah of lina, that would show that he holds that when he was excluding non-6 day activities, he was only excluding Pesach Sheni. So Gemara says, what's the Mishnah? The Mishnah says, and it doesn't say who the author is, it says that Bikurim require a carbon shlam that goes with them, and there is a special shira that the Levim sing, and there's tenufa, there's waving, you have to wave the basket around, and there's leaning, you have to spend the night. It says the Gemara, this has to be Rabbi Yehuda, because it requires tenufa, it requires waving. Rabbi Yehuda is the one who requires waving. Where does Rabbi Yehuda learn that from? So we have a brisa, quoting Rabbi Yehuda, that it says, when it says twice, you should put the basket down. It says v'hinichai, you should put it down, and then it says v'hinachtai. You can't put the same thing down twice unless you picked it up in between. Why do you pick it up in between? Because there's a mitzvah of waving, mitzvah of waving it around. So you see, Rabbi Yehuda is the one who says you require waving, therefore he must be the author of this Mishnah, and the Mishnah says he requires lina, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda obviously doesn't hold that you only require lina on a 6 or 7 day long event. The Gemara says Rabbi Yehuda is not the only one who holds you that there's a mitzvah of waving. It doesn't have to be him. It could be Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. We have a brisa where Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says that you do have to wave it. It says the kohen takes the basket from your hand, and then later you put it down again. So this shows that obviously you held it twice, and again that it's showing that you require lina. Now where is Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov? See that? So Gemara says yes, for the word yad. The word yad here applies. It says miyodecha, and in carbon shlamim, where the kohen holds the carbon pieces together with the owner and waves that around, there it also says yad. It says yad of tivienu es ishay Hashem. Just like over there, you wave it around. Here you wave it around, and therefore we have a source. So therefore we have proven that not necessarily is this Mishnah of Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore we don't have a proof that he really holds that you do require lina. So now the Gemara wants to say, what's the halacha? Let me say, bottom line, what do you do? You say Anu Shachiyanu on Shmini Atzeres or not? So the Gemara says Rav Nachman says you do, Rav Shesha says you do not, and the halacha is you do say Anu Shachiyanu on Shmini Atzeres. We have a brisa that shows that also. It says that Shmini Atzeres is its own yontif concerning 6 halachas, which the Gemara uses the siman pazar kashav to represent them. A pazar, the pei refers to pious. There's a new drawing of lots to see which family of Kohanim going to do the avoda. Zayin is man, that's our sugya. There's a new shechianu. Reish stands for regal, that it has separate mitzvahs. There's no mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah. Kuf stands for carbon, it has its own set of karbonis. It doesn't follow the pattern of sukkahs. Shin stands for shira, the Levim have to sing a different song. And Bei stands for bracha, that you say a bracha of as Yom Hashmini Chag Atzeres is there. Rashi has a second shot that you say a new bracha on the king, which you said every yontif. And that's the 6 things in which Shmini Atzeres is different than
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.